Hello, Virginia Junior Classic League. My name is Andy Volpe. I am with the 3rd Legion Cyrenaica, which is a Roman Legion living history group in New England. I'm outside of Worcester, Massachusetts, and obviously we would have been down in Richmond with you, but obviously we're not able to do that this year. Hopefully next year. So in the meantime, we're going to try it virtually. So the 3rd Legion Cyrenaica, the Roman group that I'm with here in New England, as I mentioned, is an Egyptian legion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the writings that the Romans have left for us to examine. Just going to make a little adjustment there on the camera. And this is mostly because there is a bunch of material that survives from Roman Egypt. So I'll talk about a couple of different versions of writing materials that show up in different provinces, and some of the significance of some of these writing materials and what it means for us today. So we'll start from the very beginning. One of the arguably the earliest type of writing is this stuff. We know it as papyrus, and that's where the word paper comes from. The Egyptians invent this something on the order of 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, and they find all sorts of written material, both from ancient Egypt and also from Greek and Roman Egypt, or Ptolemaic Greek, if you want to be technical. This is made out of the pith, out of the reeds of papyrus. You split it open, take out the inner bark, the inner strips, lay them out on flat rocks, and you cross-grain them. So you kind of weave them together. And when that is dry, you leave it sitting out in the sun, you'll end up with a sheet of paper, a sheet of papyrus. And it's basically ready to be written on right away, which is really pretty convenient. You can also, as you saw with the other piece there, you can roll it up, and now it's portable, so you can take it places, which is also important, both for the Egyptians and for the Romans and the Greeks using this material. This became so popular with the Romans is that they had Egypt produce tons of papyrus, and it traveled throughout all the Roman provinces. We see little pieces of papyrus in Pompeii. We find it in Vindolanda, which is a fort up in north of England. When they find the scrolls, the wrappings, like in Pompeii, of course, the volcano carbonized everything. They're able now, with today's technology, they're able to take gamma and X-ray imagery of these and essentially unroll them and be able to translate and read writing that still survives on these scrolls, even though they've been burned and they've been sitting in the ground. I find that absolutely amazing. So the Egyptians were using pallets, and there's an image of scribes walking, and they're carrying their pallets like this, kind of like in a procession, I would guess. And there's usually two reservoirs, two holes for ink, one black and one red, and a little divot, and that's to rest your reed pens in. As we get into the Greeks and the Romans, they start making ink pots and ink jars out of pottery. This is one from the British Museum, a replica of one. And it just like writing with ink pens that goes all the way into the early 20th century. You dip your pen in the ink, get some ink on there, and write it, and as long as you have ink in your well, you can write. In fact, we've got a number of references to that saying, that statement, well into the 16th century, 17th century, I should say. There was a song called "We Be Soldiers 3," where the soldier describes, as long as there's ink in my pen, I can keep writing. I forgot how to describe the basic ink. A binder or adhesive such as gum arabic or a sap, or honey mixed with water. The pigment is usually from carbon soot or lamp black. Cuttlefish makes a purplish red, and cinnabar makes red. Red tended to be used for headers and initials, whereas black was always used for the main body of text. The next piece that seems to be very common with the Romans is probably more common than the papyrus with both the Greeks and the Romans, is the wax tablet or tabula. Both of these come in single sheets, single tablets, and a lot of times we find them booked together. Two pieces bound together with a little string or leather. And this is your notebook. So you use a device called a stylus. This one happens to be made out of bronze. We also see a variety of shapes, some really simple ones like this. I mentioned Windolanda up in the north of England. They found a stylus that had writing on it. Basically, it was a souvenir. And it's pretty usable. You take the pointy end and you scratch your message into the wax, so you don't really need to dig into there very deeply. You just kind of squish or scratch the wax to make your notes. Because it's this wax and it's sticky, and you don't want to drive the point in there, it kind of alludes itself to a vertical stroke, and you're not doing a lot of curvy writing with this. This plays in perfectly with the writing style that the Romans were using, their shorthand, and even the Greeks, their shorthand that becomes what we know today as Roman Latin cursive. Something like this can be kind of hard to read nowadays. But the wax tablet, think of this as your notebook. This is a temporary writing implement. You'd record anything in here, and when you close it or you put it in a container, the message is saved and it's sitting there on the wax. So you can give it to a messenger or a courier. They can take it somewhere, and the second you open it, there's your message. I like to joke it's the Roman iPadius, the Roman iPad of its time. There is a Greek vase painting showing a fellow holding it like this on the painting. And when I first saw that image, I thought somebody was clever with Photoshop and they photoshopped a modern tablet onto this Greek vase painting. But it turns out this is the real deal. This was an actual vase painting, and he just happens to be holding it like this, which to us today looks like a laptop. Ironically, much like the one I'm recording on right now. I have a MacBook over here, and you open it up, and there it is. So we think you can hold it this way. We kind of hold it, or we call this today like a diploma style. You can also hold it this way. We see this in images from the ancient Romans. This is probably the most famous one of a Pompeian woman holding the tablet. You can see it, and she's tapping her stylus to her lips, thinking. We all do that today. There's another image of a husband and wife, and we believe the husband is a merchant of some kind, and he's holding a scroll of papyrus. So you see the images show up in artwork. And this is really great for us as reenactors and living historians and experimental archaeologists, because we have the artifact itself, we've got a visual representation in artwork, and we've got writings, ironically, of the writing. One of the quotes, one of the sayings from the Romans is tabula rasa, the wax has been worn out. When we find some of these tablets in the archaeological record, all of that wax had all been stripped away, or possibly melted or deteriorated away. And at some point, we have one, I believe it's from the Corbridge Hoard box, sets of armor were found, and somebody had scratched a message into the wood at the bottom. In fact, we think there are 2 layers of messages, so when you run out of wax, you got to make do with what you got. A find in Masada, in a cave, had this little bag that had a tablet in it. So we think these little pouches, these little pockets, were intended to carry tablets. But we find leather bags by the ton in the Roman archaeological record that could have been used for all sorts of things. In the Netherlands, in England, and the northern climates, in Germany, we see these wooden slips. The most famous one is the Vindolanda tablets, which are usually, they have a score mark in the middle, sometimes with notches on the sides or holes. And the idea is it's like its own self-addressed stamped envelope, if you think of it that way. You take your pen, you write your message into it, you then snap the tablet in half, and then you can bind it together to seal it, essentially. And there's your letter. There is a letter by the wife of an officer with a birthday invitation, and that survives at Vindolanda. What the Romans would also do is that they would bind a number of these together, and the word that shows up referring to the bark, which these are made out of, as codex. So it means both the bark, but also refers to these writing slabs, these writing tablets. So codex, book, volume, index, all have their origins in these ancient Roman writing materials. I find that pretty interesting. Going back to Roman Egypt, and even Ptolemaic Greek Egypt, the most common find of writing material are these pottery shards that we call today ostraka. So if you're familiar with the term to ostracize someone, to vote someone out by ballot, it comes from these ostraka tiles. These were a lot of times found in trash piles. Everything from sales receipts to little tweets, messages to one another. There's one of a soldier, we think is a soldier, saying, "I'm watching workers break rocks." We think this was found at Mons Claudianus, a Roman mining operation in Egypt, and he's basically saying he's bored of watching workers work on rocks. These particular ones are replicas of Greek ostraka that are dedications. You can see the name Hercules on this one, or Heracles, which of course is the Greek variant. So we find a lot of Greek inscription even in Roman context in Egypt, but we do find a lot of Latin as well. We think, generally speaking, the Latin is more military based, and the Greek is pretty much like the common language. There's a variation, we start to see that with this. This happens to be an ostraka from Thebes, where they're starting to combine the Greek writing style, Greek alphabet, and Egyptian hieroglyph, or at least Egyptian hieroglyphic shorthand, so they can write obviously faster. They combine the two. They start to influence each other, and that's what we know today as Demotic and Coptic. Some other writing stuff here. So I mentioned the pen reed cut out of the papyrus strips. We've got the stylus, which is for the wax tablet, and then we've got these guys. This is a metal pen nib. There's finds in Vindolanda. Again, this is a treasure trove of Roman artifacts. This particular one is copied at the one in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, but it looks almost identical to the ones in Vindolanda. They're a little more curlicue, and we think that's when you dip that in the ink, capillary action will hold the ink inside the spiral, and as you write, it'll eventually bleed out, more or less, if you want to think of it that way. So I find this really interesting because when I was your age, too many years ago, I was told in my bad history books that metal writing nibs only existed in the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution, and machinery was able to make these. But they find metal pens dating back to the 16th century. Then they find these guys that date back to the 1st and 2nd centuries. So they had these. They had metal pens. The problem was that if this breaks, you can't use it anymore. Whereas the reeds, as long as you have papyrus plants, you can make the paper and you can make the reeds to write on them. And you can just resharpen it over and over and over again, even when it gets down a little stub. By the end of the Roman high period, we're getting near the end of the empire, 600s, 700s AD, they're starting to develop a new material to write on, and that's taking sheep or goat skin, scraping it, stretching it, scraping it, stretching it over and over and over again, until you end up with a sheet of material that we call today parchment or vellum. So this is animal skin. And this, of course, becomes extremely popular throughout the Middle Ages, all the way up until the 1600s. There's still some elements of of parchment still being used. The wax tablets are also long-lived. These date back to the Bronze Age. The Greeks are, of course, using this. The Romans are using these. Middle Ages are still using these. There is a mine in, I believe it's England, using wax tablets for record keeping in the 18 teens. So I think that's pretty impressive to use that kind of material for so long. The ostraka really only seems to be in antiquity. We don't really see the pottery shards used in later contexts. If you're interested in alphabets and writing styles and deciphering the cryptic writing styles that the Romans had, Romans came up with a couple of variations on their alphabet in the earlier times. I believe it's Emperor Claudius wanted to bring about a set of shorthand or different writing styles, different ways of abbreviating letters, but it didn't seem to be very popular. We see that again in medieval scribal contexts in the 1000s, 1100s or so, up until about the age of printing in the 1440s, 1450s. We see long words crammed down and abbreviated, and different symbols being used to shorten words so it doesn't take as long to read. Some other interesting writing stuff that I find that survives. So I mentioned the birthday letter. There is a supply letter, we think it is, or a supply receipt. We used to think it was a thank you note to mom saying thank you for the new socks. But some recent scholars have been saying that it might have actually been a supply receipt of material that went to a fort. Some other type of writing that you may not necessarily be aware of. So I mentioned Claudius. He was really trying to push that for public inscription. So you've got two different types of Roman writing, and essentially coming off of Greek and even earlier Etruscan writing was you have the cursive and the what we call today lowercase or unical, where your everyday writing is written in this smaller, faster script. But your public inscriptions that everybody is going to be able to read, that's when you see your capitals, the capital letters, or uppercase. And both of those terms, upper and lowercase, comes from printing from Gutenberg in the 1400s, 1440s. There's an uppercase of all your capital letters, the drawer with all the different holes for your different movable type, and then the lowercase is all your little letters and symbols. So it's literally upper and lowercase. That's where it comes from. There we go. So public inscription is important too, and they design the capital letters to be as readable as possible. So if you're at Trajan's Column staring up at this thing in the forum, you want to be able to read what it says, and you can't really read a cursive very well at distance. So have things like graffiti. There's some famous writings on the Capona, the taverns in Pompeii, of describing what they have for sale at the food vendor. But we also think we see political advertisements. We see gladiators fighting and caricature. There is a image of a cataphract, an armored cavalryman from, I believe it's Dura Europus in Syria, of a guy on horseback, and you can see his armor and stuff. We see writing even on mosaics. If you think of, say, a mosaic of Dionysus, like one near me at the Worcester Art Museum, you can see the Greek lettering on it. The Greek vases have lettering all over it. So public inscription is very important. There's even things too like the Latin lead curse tablets. I don't have an example with me, unfortunately, but we had a little workshop with the Legion, with 20th Legion at the Junior Classical League convention, I think a year or two ago, and that was pretty popular. So if you have any friends that went to that in previous years, ask them about that. They might remember that. So we have writing all over the place. We have the Ostraka. Anything can go on here. Little messages, little tweets to each other. The papyrus tends to be your more permanent records, something you need to keep. And this, of course, forms the basis of libraries. So Alexandria had hundreds of these. And scrolls were seen throughout the region. So this is your permanent record. We also think the codex could have been a permanent record, but we find a lot of these in trash piles and burn piles. When I believe it was in Vindolanda, again, such a treasure trove. They must have been clearing out the library from the archives from the previous year's tax records. So they found a bunch. The Romans threw them in a fire pit and tried to burn them away to make room for new ones. But those survived, so they were able to translate those, which I think is fantastic. So this is also, by the way, my art studio. I'm an artist by trade, and I've been doing a lot of historical replica work. And as we get into the 18th century, of course, the start of the neoclassical movement, especially the English, were really big on being Roman as much as they could be. So earlier this year, I hand engraved a full-size replica of Paul Revere's Boston Massacre from 1770. Hand engraved on copper, the exact same way that Paul Revere did, down to essentially the paper. So like I said, we're unable to be together in person, but we're able to do this virtually. I also have a ton of books I will try to make a reference for. This City of the Sharp-Nosed Fish is from Oxyrhynchos, which is in central Egypt, and they find all sorts of Greek Greek writing, Greek ostraka, and things like that. This Life in Egypt under Roman rule mentions some things about writings. There's a case where the locals bother the Roman clerk in town for a holiday celebration, and the locals went to the clerk and said, you need to go into the archives and dig out this record on this one obscure god that we're supposed to venerate today, because we need to know the details. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And apparently the clerks were a little annoyed with that, because it's like, don't bother me, sort of a thing. The writing styles too are also really obviously important too. This is the Latin and Greek is the basis of English. I mentioned the thing with the printing. My background, like I said, in art is in printing. Roman style lettering becomes extremely popular in the 50s, especially by the 1500s. William Caxton is the Gutenberg of England. He brings a printing press to England in the 1480s, and he translates classic texts. He has an English translation of Troy. He has a bunch of classical and translated into English. He kind of actually got in trouble for that, because he was giving the local populace the ability to read these considered sacred texts that only the rich and elite were supposed to be able to have access to. So history is always full of interesting characters and situations. But anyway, all that said, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll hope for the best for next year. Thank you, and take care.